The Power of the Daleks. Despite being uncredited for his work, former script editor Dennis Spooner was formally approached about revising The Power of the Daleks. Dennis Spooner's primary mission was to refine the portrayal of the Doctor, which he discussed with Patrick Troughton. In addition, Spooner found himself paring down David Whittaker's overlong scripts, including the removal of an extensive sequence in episode 3 set in the colony's medical centre. Because of the extra time needed for Dennis Spooner to complete his work, it was decided that Doctor Who would take a 1-week hiatus from studio recording. The delay meant that the cast would have to be paid for an extra week. We can thank Dennis Spooner for helping to define a new Doctor, and for the cast having to do no work but still get paid. The Highlanders. Key component of the adventure was the character of Jamie McCrimmon. In real life, the McCrimmons were hereditary pipers to the clan MacLeod of the Isle of Skye. Writer Gerry Davis proposed that Jamie could be the son of Donald Ban McCrimmon, who was killed during the Rout of Moy in February 1746. In real life, however, the MacLeods and McCrimmons supported King George. In the Highlanders, Gerry Davis depicts Jamie as being a piper allied to the clan MacLaren, who were indeed Jacobites. And in fact, an Alexander MacLaren fought for Charles in the Athol Brigade. He utilised the authentic slogan of the MacLarens, Cregar Tuirig, literally the Boar's Rock, in reference to a rock formation at Bal Cahida, the clan's traditional seat. The Underwater Menace. The broadcast of episode 1 on January 14th sparked a very angry letter the following Monday from a Mrs. N. Safford of the National Society for the Welfare of Children in Hospitals. Safford was concerned that the sight of Polly undergoing an operation to turn her into a fish person would scare children about upcoming surgeries, who might become convinced that they would wake to find themselves transformed into monsters after receiving injections. Producer Innes Lloyd refuted this argument, noting that the fantastical nature of the Underwater Menace made it clear to viewers that the story events were not realistic. The Moonbase. With the Cybermen's visual appearance having been updated, it was decided that a new vocal effect should also be employed for this story. Voice artist Peter Hawkins was given a modified dental palette, originally designed for use by patients who had undergone the surgical removal of their larynx, which produced electronic sounds just by shaping the mouth and lips appropriately. The method was used for the first time on episode 3, recorded on February 18th. Unfortunately, the persistent vibration induced by the device gave Peter Hawkins headaches and made him feel nauseous. The Macra Terror. Ian Stuart Black's script described the monsters as general insectoid creatures, and the serial's title became The Insect Men to reflect this. However, script editor Gerry Davis feared that the result might be too closely to the Zarbi from 1965's The Web Planet, and decided that the monsters instead should be giant crabs. They were then dubbed Macras, apparently from the genus name of the Japanese spider crab, Macrocerae kimpreri. I probably pronounced that wrong. Unfortunately, some dialogue which referred to the Macras as insects survived in Black's final draft and were present upon transmission. The Faceless Ones. Innes Lloyd and Gerry Davis had concluded that Polly and Ben were not working well as companions, and decided to write them out of Doctor Who at the next opportunity. Because of the change in the length of The Chameleons, Anneke Wills and Michael Craze were now contracted until part 2 of the next story, The Evil of the Daleks. On February 8th, writers David Ellis and Malcolm Hawke were asked to write the pair out of their adventure's last 4 instalments, with the possible exception of a film sequence for episode 6, and to introduce a young female character who might be suitable as a new companion. The same was asked of David Whittaker, writer of Evil of the Daleks, and this gave Innes Lloyd and Gerry Davis a choice of potential new regular characters. Anneke Wills and Michael Craze were notified that they would not be needed for the first 2 parts of The Evil of the Daleks after all, but they would be paid for the entirety of their contracts. The Evil of the Daleks. On January 4th, 1967, writer David Whittaker submitted a brief outline of his proposed adventure, simply referred to as Daleks. Real imaginative there. At this stage, the Daleks' plan required the Doctor and Edward Waterfield to travel back to the year 20,000 BC to retrieve a caveman named Og. It was from Og that the Doctor was to deduce the essence of humanity, which the Daleks intended to eradicate from every generation of man, thereby eliminating the Earth as a threat. The Tomb of the Cybermen. The final episode of this Cyberman adventure incited considerable controversy due to its violent and disturbing content, particularly the scene in which fluid spurted out of a Cyberman's innards after it was attacked by Toberman. On September 26, writer Kit Pedler appeared on the premiere of the BBC commentary programme Talk Back to debate the issue and defended Doctor Who. The Abominable Snowman. Before settling on the legend of the Yeti in the Himalayas, writers Mervyn Haseman and Henry Lincoln considered using the Loch Ness Monster as the basis for their story. It would take another 8 years for Doctor Who to tackle the Scottish legend in 1975. The Ice Warriors. Writer Brian Hales found inspiration in an article he had recently read about the discovery of a well-preserved corpse of a woolly mammoth which was excavated from the Siberian ice in 1901. He was also intrigued by the planet Mars and wondered what sort of race could conceivably have flourished in its environment. These notions led him to imagine a scenario in which a Martian was discovered on Earth, frozen in a glacier, and then brought back to life. The Enemy of the World. This serial was the focal point of a series of changes in Doctor Who's key production roles behind the scenes. Most significantly, this would be the final story overseen by producer Innes Lloyd, who had wanted to leave Doctor Who for several months. As had been planned for some time, story editor Peter Bryant was pegged as Innes Lloyd's successor. It was agreed that Derek Sherwin would take over as script editor, which meant that a new assistant would have to be recruited as well. Derek Sherwin himself only planned to remain on Doctor Who for a brief period of time, and so his intent was to hire someone whom he could quickly train as his own replacement. He therefore offered the post to his close friend, Terence Dix, who joined the production team around the start of 1968. The Web of Fear. Midway through the broadcast of The Web of Fear, the BBC received a complaint from London Transport. They accused director Douglas Camfield of having somehow contrived to film in the underground without permission or payment. Eventually, London Transport was persuaded that what appeared on screen was in fact the result of Myerscough-Jones' convincing set design rather than the fruits of any mischief on the part of the Doctor Who team. Fury from the Deep. On September 24, 1964, Doctor Who's story editor at the time, David Whittaker, rejected a proposal from writer Victor Pemberton entitled The Slide, concerning a sentient form of mud which took over a group of villagers. Victor Pemberton also submitted a version, excluding Doctor Who elements, to BBC Radio instead. There it found favour with producer Peter Bryant and was eventually broadcast during February and March 1966. The following year, producer Peter Bryant became the story editor of Doctor Who, and Victor Pemberton was hired as his assistant. After 3 months, Victor Pemberton decided to return to freelance writing and proposed that he craft a new Doctor Who serial which would resurrect elements of The Slide. The finished result was Fury from the Deep. The Wheel in Space. The scripts for The Wheel in Space introduced a new type of Cyberman, the Cyberplanner. Originally, this was envisaged as a regular Cyberman attached by wires to a special chair, as opposed to the non-humanoid design that would appear on screen. They would just use this design 38 years later in the Age of Steel. The Dominators. Both the writers and the BBC entered into merchandising endeavours involving the Quarks without the permission of the other, leading to a dispute over whether the writers owned the copyright to the Quarks wholly or whether it was shared with the BBC. Mervyn Haseman and Henry Lincoln threatened to go to court to prevent the broadcast of The Dominators. A series of meetings was held during July in an effort to resolve the matter. Things became so heated that at one point, Haseman and Lincoln threatened to go to court to prevent the broadcast of The Dominators. The Mind Robber. Writer Peter Ling was now aware that Victoria Waterfield would no longer be the Doctor's female companion. By the time his scripts entered production, and with little information on her replacement made available at that point, he referred to the female companion in his storyline as Zoe. Derek Sherwin and producer Peter Bryant liked the name so much, and with Ling's permission, it was ultimately adopted for the new character. The Invasion. Doctor Who's 6 production blocks saw a significant change in the way recording was scheduled. Up until this point, pre-filming had occurred during rehearsals for other serials, enabling the completion of more than 40 episodes per year. In light of Patrick Troughton's exhaustion, however, it had now been agreed that this overlap would be eliminated, giving each story a dedicated week for pre-filming, or 2 weeks in the case of a story with the length of The Invasion. The trade-off was that the new production block would see the completion of only 34 instalments. In early 1960, The Crotons. In early 1965, writer Robert Holmes developed a Doctor Who storyline entitled The Trap, in which robot servitors tested the TARDIS crew to determine which of them should be selected to help pilot a crashed spaceship. When Bob Holmes began writing for the drama series Private Eye, he ceased working on The Trap, and it was forgotten for 3 years. Robert Holmes recovered the script whilst cleaning out some old files in his house and felt that it still had value to it, so he resubmitted it to Doctor Who producer Peter Bryant on May 20th, 1968. The Seeds of Death. Around the time that the scripts were commissioned, Brian Hales was asked to implement a major change by replacing Jamie with a new companion called Nick. Fraser Hines had decided to leave Doctor Who in the story preceding The Seeds of Death, but during September, his status became a lot less certain. It appears that Hines changed his mind several times, leading Brian Hales to write the role of the male companion for an unspecified character. Finally, it was confirmed that Fraser Hines would in fact be remaining on Doctor Who until the end of the season so that he could leave alongside Patrick Troughton. The Space Pirates. Although Peter Bryant was still Doctor Who's producer, he was preparing to move over to Special Project Air and was also suffering from a bout of ill health. As such, Derek Sherwin, who had previously been the programme's story editor, was taking on more and more of Peter Bryant's responsibilities, with the expectation of eventually replacing him completely. It was also around this time that Terrance Dicks acquired an assistant in the form of Trevor Ray. However, as work began on the Space Pirates, Terrance Dicks was absorbed with the serials which would be made on either side of it. He was rewriting the last 2/3 of The Seeds of Death, and collaborating with Malcolm Hawke on the massive 10-part story, The War Games, which would be the season finale. With Trevor Ray unprepared to take over as script editor, it was agreed that Derek Sherwin would return to his former post for the Space Pirates, though Robert Holmes claims he didn't really get much help from anyone on the Space Pirates, and maybe it shows. The War Games. During the summer of 1968, the latter stages of Doctor Who's 6th season began to take shape. The penultimate story, designated with the production code Serial ZZ, would be 6 episodes long. At first, this was probably going to be a third Yeti story from Mervyn Haseman and Henry Lincoln, entitled The Laird of Macrimmon. When a dispute arose between the two writers and the Doctor Who production office, it appears that Malcolm Hawke's The Impersonators took its place. However, it was decided to abandon both slots and turn them into a mammoth 10-episode serial, the longest story ever attempted by Doctor Who since the 12-part Daleks Masterplan in 1965. And that's all for the Second Doctor Facts. Join me next time when we'll be discussing the Third Doctor era. Goodbye.